The following program is presented by the Metropolitan Library Service Agency.
Hello, welcome to All About Kids, a program focusing on the interests of children and young people and some of the issues affecting them. Today, Children's Services Librarian Pamela Holt will be talking with three professors from the College of Architecture and Landscape Architecture at the University of Minnesota, Cynthia Jara, Lars Peterssen, and Tim Fuller. They'll be discussing a special project based on a memory of a favorite children's book. Second-year architectural studio design students have created a variety of impressions of a room featured in Elizabeth Enright's children's book titled The Saturdays. Later on in the program, we'll be watching the professors and the students as they discuss how the students conceived this final project.
Hello, I'm Pamela Holt, a librarian at Hennepin County. I recently had a fascinating experience at the University of Minnesota Architecture School. I was on a review committee looking at the work of the second-year students who'd been given the problem of reading a book and creating a space for a fictional child. The problem was, in the book The Saturdays, which was a book written for children in 1941, the author Elizabeth Enright describes a family of 4 children who inhabit a brownstone-type house in Manhattan. The top floor of the brownstone was called the office, and it serves as this children's playroom. The students were assigned the task of depicting through drawings and models the playroom exactly as it was described in the text of the book. Elizabeth Enright's writing was based in part on her own childhood, and one could assume that she was describing a room that she knew herself. Enright drew her own illustrations, and the book contained 2 vignettes within the playroom. The Saturdays, Chapter 1. There were 4 Melendi children. Mona was the eldest. She was 13 and had 2 long, thick, butter-colored braids that she was always threatening to cut off. Rush came next. He was 12, dark, with mussy hair and a look of mischievous wickedness. Miranda, always called Randy, was 10 and a half, with dark, untidy hair like Rush's. And Oliver was the youngest, 6 years old, a calm and thoughtful person. The room in which they were sitting might have been called a playroom, a schoolroom, or a nursery by most people, but to the Melendez it was known as the office. It was at the very top of the house, so that they could make almost as much noise as they wanted to, and it had everything that such a room should have: a skylight, 4 windows facing east and north, and a fireplace with a basket-shaped grate. The floor was covered with scarred red linoleum that didn't matter, and yellow walls were encrusted with hundreds of indispensable objects: bookcases bursting with books, pictures both by the Melende children and less important grown-up artists, dusty Native American war bonnets, a string of Mexican devil masks, and a shelf of dolls in varying degrees of decay, coats and hats hanging on pegs, and leftover decorations from Mona's birthday party, and other articles too numerous to mention. In one corner of the room stood an old upright piano that always looked offended for some reason, and whose rack was littered with sheets of music, all patched and held together with Scotch tape. In addition to various chairs, tables, toys, cupboards, there was a dingy big sofa with busted springs, a blackboard, a trapeze, and a pair of rings. That was all, but I think you would agree that that was enough. The Melendez seemed to go on and on collecting precious articles, so many that they could never bear to throw them away. The office was their pride and joy, and what it lacked in tidiness it more than made up for in color and comfort, and broken down luxuries such as the couch and the piano. Also, it was full of landmarks, any Melende child could have told you that the long scars on the linoleum had been made by Rush trying out a new pair of skates on a holiday afternoon in 1939, or that spider-shaped hole in the east window had been accomplished by Oliver throwing a milk of magnesia bottle, or that spark holes in the hearth rug had occurred when Mona tossed a bunch of firecrackers, Chinese firecrackers, into the fire just for fun. The Melende history was written everywhere. Hello, I'm here today with 3 professors from the University of Minnesota Architecture School. Welcome.
Thank you.
Tim Fuller, Cynthia Jara, and Lars Peterssen. The book and the experience I had at the architecture school was fascinating for someone who loves children's services. Tell me how you got the idea. Who'd read the book?
Well, it was a book that I had read. I'm not exactly sure where to begin to explain how we produce a problem in the architecture school, but one of our goals is to help students understand what their experience will be when they deal with clients who often come with images of a room or a house or a space that they want based on past experience or something that they project. And so a description written by an author can be a kind of surrogate for that dealing with a client. So that's one reason that we often give problems, or a genre of problems that we give in the architecture school are problems that are based on a piece of writing. In this case, we were going to be doing a child care center. We have in our program, in our curriculum, this is second year design. In the spring, the students work on a public facility, a mid-sized public facility. It might be a courthouse or a neighborhood library. This year we chose to do a child care center. And in order to initiate the students into the idea of designing an environment for children, we wanted them to begin to get into the minds of children and think of the child as the client. So we wanted them to, the first problem was just kind of 1 week warm-up exercise where we asked them to read a children's book and think of these children and the way that they had described their space and the importance of the space that they inhabited and how that would influence then their reaction and their design of the space.
Tim, how many students did you have working on the project?
We each, I think, had the same number, 14 students, 3 studios. I thought it was a very interesting beginning to the quarter, and one that actually proved to be quite helpful at the end of the quarter as well, because often with a program, a daycare or a child care center is a fairly complex programmatic entity for students to try and grapple with. And at the end of the quarter, it was very helpful to get them to remember this initial project and the scale that we asked them to present it at, which allowed them to get to a level of detail and a level of consideration that is sometimes very hard to get back to during the course of the quarter. So,
Lars, did you find it difficult to translate a fictional child, or is that quite frequently done, that you can create a client? I mean, for me, to take a fictional child and a piece of children's literature and have the students take them so seriously, it was very exciting.
Well, this was a very interesting project for me to teach, because when I had been Cynthia's student in architecture school at the university, we had done a similar project of designing, actually what it was an Italian villa from a letter that an ancient Roman statesman had written to one of his friends. And so that was a great opportunity, because we were traveling through Europe as a group of students as we were doing the project. So to take that same idea, which was a 100-year-old architectural problem, or several 100-year-old architectural problem, and to bring that into a book that was written in the 20th century and had to do specifically with children was really an exciting idea.
That's fascinating. I really would like to listen to you discuss the work and the project with the students.
The format we're going to use here is that each of the 3 students will present their work in a brief verbal presentation, and after that we'll have criticism, interactive discussion between the critics, the 3 of us and the 3 of you. Would you introduce yourselves as you give your presentation?
Sure. Hi, I'm Ben Oz. For this project, this was the first thing that I made. And this is a collage made out of pieces and pictures from a magazine that I actually tore apart. And what this is a view looking into the office or the playroom that we were supposed to design. And it's a view from the top as if the roof was taken off and the walls were kind of folded back and everything was kind of flat. And what was interesting to me about the story in trying to design a room from this story was looking at what was actually remembered, and that all of us remember things that are significant. And to the children in this story, I tried to put in here the images that were significant, and such things as the couch and the fireplace and the piano. And here's the red linoleum floor and then the yellow walls. And the room is described as being quite cluttered and messy. And I felt that these things, the piano, the fireplace, the couch, were the things that created the boundary. The actual architecture, the walls and the ceiling, they weren't described as being particularly interesting. And so I felt that the room was probably fairly plain, and that was one of the difficulties for me, was designing a room that was simple and plain, but had quite a character about it of being cluttered and full of things. And this image was trying to get at some of that character. The next thing, kind of my final drawings that I presented, I'll try to move this at a better angle. These are two drawings, two section drawings, and they're cutting through the room and then looking into the room as if you were inside. So this is cutting through the room and then looking at one of the walls, the north wall with three of the windows. And one of the goals that I had in here was to try to capture accurately what the actual construction of the building would be, and creating a simple room with the walls. This is actually cutting right through the fireplace, so you see into the fireplace and then how the fire would escape out the top. And then the ceiling, simple beams and a simple floor, and then trying to place in the room where these things might be. The couch in front of the fireplace, fairly ordinary windows that are spaced evenly, which are somewhat nondescript. They weren't described very intricately in the story, so I felt they would be fairly plain. I have the trapeze hanging here, and some bookcases. This next drawing here is also a section, but it's cut the other way. It's cut through the long way of the building, so you see the stairs that would come up in a hallway that you would enter this playroom or office here, and so I again show the simple structure, the beams that would go this way, and the walls that would be the boundaries of the space, and then try to just place in there the objects that I felt were significant, the fireplace, and the window that they described with the crack, the milk of magnesia bottle that was thrown and cracked this small window here, and then a bookshelf that was cluttered with books and different images there.
Let's go on to Anne.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Anne Maki, and the way that I approached the problem or this project was reading this book and seeing how this very simple space really ends up being a very complex interlocking spaces and places for these children to play that ends up being really important, that they can learn in this small environment, and by interacting in this place with each other, they end up learning about the greater environment. And a line that I liked in the book that helped me to work with this project was, but being by yourself, all by yourself in a big city for the first time is like you find that you can ride a bicycle or do the dog paddle. The sense of independence is intoxicating. And these children end up having a club in this room. And so the way I started the project was having this developed interior elevation, and the way what this means is that if you pretend like it's a cereal box and you cut it open, so you can end up seeing all, there are all four walls that you can end up seeing, and you also see the ceiling, the walls, and the floor all at the same time. And so you can see into the bathroom, you can see down the hallway, you can see the piano, and that each wall ends up having an important part of it, as well as you can see the important things that are a part of their day, the trapeze. And so then, looking at how you have this very simple plan, the stair hall, the storage room, of the bathroom that leads to this main room. I'll show you you can see that this is showing, this is the way that you would look at it, as if it were taking the ceiling, the roof off and looking straight down. And so you see the top of the piano and the top of the couch. This is, I'm looking down at the fireplace. And this dotted line here shows that there's a skylight that allows light to come in from the ceiling and looking down. And then in this way, and also these lines here, that means that there's a door that swings open. And I've got a little model here. And just show you that. Let's see how this works. So it shows that, let's see, I want to make sure it's oriented the right way. That you have these two doors that open, and these kids are really active, and they end up being actors, and I see them as having, I want to focus on how this is a really participative space, that you can end up having this audience place, that there are these trapezes that are right here that can swing. They can also use as a curtain. You have the piano here that allows them to play. You can open these two doors, and then maybe they end up, having plays, behind them. The skylight is right here, and it makes another space right here in the corner, like a reading nook. And so in this, even though there's it's a very simple room, there's still many places that are created inside. So that's, I guess that's pretty good. Yeah.
And my name is Eric Lennison, and just last year I was in London in December '93, and I was in the building that was really similar to the brownstones that are in New York. And this is the building in London, and here's another brownstone that would be in New York. So they're very similar in their characteristic. And part of the idea of being in the playroom was being up in sort of the roof of the building. And it sort of has this character all to itself. It's very different than being in the rest of the building because it takes a long time to get up to the very top floor, and the kids sort of have their very own space that they can have up there. And so what I did is I made a model of the space that I could take apart, so I could look at what the building would look like from the outside and slowly take the building apart, take the roof off, so you can see inside of how these play areas within the building would then be made. And by doing this, you can see lots of different parts of this building, and you can see that with the stairway in this area and having a very open area, that these kids can have their own clubhouse, that they can now be together. But at the same time, little parts like the couch and the fireplace are like the centerpieces of the room, but the areas behind the couch and around the bookshelves sort of make their own little spaces that they can then have little time to themselves and play their own games and do things by them to enjoy the company of each other. And can you hold this for a second? Mm-hmm. And in recent a couple drawings, you can see that even in the windows, that there would be a space you could sit and sort of read a book or look out the window and really see what's going on all around you. And they can really enjoy and have a great time. So,
one of the things that the presentations show is that there is no right plan. Although we know, based on the type of building it is, it's a party wall building, so that there's shared walls on either side of the building, and there can't be any windows in those walls. So the fireplace is going to be on one party wall or another, and the windows are going to be at the front of the house. And that makes for some uniformity in the plans. But otherwise, you've arranged the rooms differently, and you've furnished them differently. How do you account for that in the interpretation of the?
Well, there are stereotypical brownstones that we ended up studying. There are a couple right there. One is just a photocopied image showing that. That's one, but there are so many different kinds and ways that that New York has them and different cities have them. So I think that that's part of it, and also then it comes down to that it was just a written piece. And again, there were 14 times 3 students that all came up with a different way, which is really rather surprising. But
and mine was pretty different because it was more open. that the rooms were not enclosed and that the stairway was open with this playroom. And that way, it actually opened up the area for the kids to be sort of heard by the rest of the house, so that there are no walls separating the stairway from the play area. And that sort of adds a nice connection for any parents, or the whole house can sort of listen to what the kids are doing, and there's sort of a safe feeling about that. You know what's going on.
To some degree, this was also determined by the different attitudes that you took. And there is a difference in the attitude between all three of you, among all three of you. In particular, Anne, could you talk a little bit about your notion about the theatrical nature of this family and the notion of the placement of the couch as audience and different ways in which you could use the room?
Well, Mona, the oldest, wants to be an actress, and Randy wants to be a dancer. So I figured that they end up having this performance space right here, and that so these are the wall that has the 3 windows, facing outside, and that you can end up having this big lumpy couch, and Cuffy and Dad and Father can come up and be able to watch whatever it is that's going on here. That a very simple way of just opening the doors and adding a string here. Maybe they end up tying the doorknobs, and they can have a place here and do puppet shows. That by using the trapeze, having these 2 trapeze, right here, you can end up having some, creating some kind of a curtain, and also then having this, by having a piano, an upright piano right here, then you can be part of this performance space. And I just felt like that even though there's really, this is just an empty room, you can end up using it in, you allow the children to create their own environment by just, by this space that wasn't designed necessarily for children.
Let me ask a specific question about one particular of the building. And the 3 of you, I can't see Ben's section drawing at the moment, but the 3 of you treated one element differently in all 3, and maybe you could talk about that one thing relative to what you brought out of it. There's a flat, low-sloped roof here. Anne is working with, Eric has kind of a gambreled, multifaceted, multi-pitched roof. And from the section that we're seeing that Ben has drawn, it's quite flat with a parapet in front that's substantially higher than some of the others that we're looking at. Can any one of you respond to, maybe Anne, the things that you were just talking about? Is there something about the roof that made that work better or worse? Or
I just saw that I figured that this was a very typical brownstone, which as I studied, I went and did some research as to what the places are like, and it seemed that was the one that seemed like it would apply in this case, even though there are variations. It seemed like that was one that would allow for a very simple space, because if it was anything that was unique or really striking, the kids would have mentioned it in the writing, and they didn't. So I figured it's a very typical space that they saw in all their friends' houses as well, so why would they mention anything different?
Yeah, and at least in the place that I stayed at London, I stayed at the very top, so I was sort of up in the roof, and it did have this sort of enclosing feeling, how it sort of came into you on the walls as well as the ceiling, so it slowly closed in from sort of an angled wall, and that was sort of a nice feeling that you were sort of very safely enclosed by the building, and it was really a nice space to be in. And it also brought the scale down a little bit to the kids' size, because that top floor is sort of a little lower.
So you were trying to recapture what, from your own personal experience, specifically meant attic to you, and why you, from the experience that you had, thought that an attic was an intimate place to be in and scale to children.
And sort of informal for their it's open to anything that they want to do.
Yeah, that comes out in Eric's model, where he chose to put what's called a gambrel roof on the top, and in the front then, where the windows are, you can, if you put the model back together, you can kind of you can see then, if I turn it around there, or just turn that around, and you can look in and see that around where the windows are, that the roof gets lower, and then the tiny spaces are made, the little spaces are made at the windows where the kids could sit So that development of the roof allowed those kind of spaces to...
So things that Eric was doing within the manipulating the roof and the dormer shapes were things that maybe Ben and Anne were doing with particulars inside the room.
And just quickly to go back to Ben's collage, your collage, Ben, was a different approach, and it was an approach to get more at the visual quality of the room and the texture, and that idea of seeing something there and trying to bring it into reality. And when you finally come to your final drawing, did you feel that you succeeded in bringing those two together?
Well, I'll try to place kind of these side by side to look at both of them. You know, when I first did the collage, I wanted to place in here simply, before I tried to actually construct the room, place things in there that I knew existed, and that was the red linoleum floor, these images of the couch and the fireplace, and to get at that character that Cynthia was just mentioning. And it was a difficult move to go from this kind of image to this one, because I also knew that I felt that the building was very simple and ordinary in its construction, and I think I don't have some of this visual character inside of here. It's not as possibly as rich of a place as that, and so I don't think I was as successful in bringing this kind of image to that.
And yet the room does have a very nice, simple, intimate quality, which is one of the qualities you were looking for.
I want to thank each of you for joining us on All About Kids, and most especially for the assignment and for the students. Children are clearly who we need to put first, and this assignment at the University of Minnesota Architecture School places children in the marketplace with a great deal of respect. Thank you all for being with us.
Thank you.
I wonder how many viewers out there have their own ideas about rooms from favorite children's books. It was a wonderful idea and an interesting project. Thank you, Professors Jara, Peterssen, and Fuller. Thank you, Pamela Holt. And thanks to all of you for joining us on All About Kids. Please tune in again.
This has been a presentation of Hennepin County Library in conjunction with the Twin Cities Metropolitan Library Service Agency.